Welcome to Business Talk Sister Gawk. I'm Becca, and today's podcast episode is The History of Marketing, Part 3. And I know some of you have been waiting for this. It's been a couple weeks, but here we are back talking about the history of marketing. And where we left off was talking about how the introduction of all of this political advertising started happening within digital platforms. Now, I talked a little bit about in the past David Axelrod being this political strategist, consultant that really helped with the 2008 political campaign of Barack Obama. Now, what's interesting about this is that it's the first time really that politicians started to use digital means to get influence of voters. Now, because this is just like a new space and things are kind of the Wild West in this regard, there was all these things that were tried. And I would say one of the things at the beginning that David Axelrod was known for, first of all, in his career, was helping African-American candidates win in the Chicago area. But then also, he was known for, specifically in this campaign at the forefront, was something that he was able to do with a giving campaign. And this is where I think people start to perk up in the finance area. They're like, oh, how did you get people to donate? Because they'd never seen this kind of traction before. Now, I'm just going to talk about their strategy was to use internet channels to target specifically people under 30 years old. And what they were able to do is say, just give a little bit, just contribute what you can. It was around $100 or less. And what they were able to get in 2007 as they ran this campaign was 470 plus thousand people giving these small micro donations. Now, this was something that was completely different than any strategy that had been tried before. And it really started to make people realize, wow, you can actually get small individual people rather than going after all of these large donations to support your campaign. Now, this was a new revolutionary thing in politics because people didn't know how to access and leverage that mass number of voters with just a little bit of change in their pocket. Before, they were only courting all of these big companies and individuals. But with this new use of technology, they could all of a sudden access the masses and get a little piece of everyone's pocketbook. And at the time, this was so revolutionary to all of these political consultants and all of these political campaigns. They were studying it, they're watching it. Wow, this is amazing that they could figure out a way to do this. Well, that also was something that started happening with, hey, go to the polls and all this kind of stuff about targeted advertisements. But the thing is, what really broke the internet, and I say that in the digital marketing sense, of all of the people that were starting to watch these things and say, wow, that's new, that's different. This is a whole new way of targeting consumers and encouraging them to be educated on the voting process, etc. But it started to get deeper than that. And it really started to make people uneasy when it actually came to 2012. So there was a lot of stuff in between, people trying things, all this stuff in between. But what really started to make people afraid was in 2012, Facebook shook up digital marketers by releasing a specific 61 million person experiment on social influence and political mobilization. And you can actually download this from researchgate.net. It's called a 61 million person experiment. And I actually have a copy of the report. But one of the crazy things about this, and I'm going to read to you what the intro excerpt is on this. Human behavior is thought to spread through face-to-face social networks. But it is difficult to identify social influence effects in observational studies, and it is unknown whether online social networks operate in the same way. Here, we report results from a randomized controlled trial of political mobilization messages delivered to 61 million Facebook users during the 2010 U.S. congressional elections. The results show that messages directly influence political self-expression, information seeking, and real-world voter behavior of millions of people. Furthermore, the messages not only influenced the users who received them, but also the user's friends and friends of friends. The effect of social transmission on real world voting was greater than the direct effect of the messages themselves. And nearly all the transmission occurred between close friends who were more likely to have face-to-face relationship. These results suggest that strong ties are instrumental in spreading both online and real-world behavior in human social networks. Okay, so I'm just going to narrow down to one specific aspect of this, that when this research study actually came forward, people started really digging into the data and looking at some of the stuff. And I remember reading at that time period an article about they picked two towns, similar size, demographics, all this stuff, and they would do a control study and a like control meaning nothing was done here in this one town, but then they also did a experiment of like self-reported voting or having a validated voting of today is election day, find your polling place in the US, click I voted button to tell your friends you voted. Okay, so when this happened and they compared the two towns side by side, they were able to show that they could influence voter turnout at the polls, which at face value is like, oh, okay, well, like we want everyone to get out and vote. So great. And when friends are saying I voted, it influences other friends to feel like they should go vote, right? But the problem is, and this is where everyone started to get nervous about this and start questioning the social responsibility of Facebook's ability to do this stuff, was the aspect of if Facebook or whoever had control of Facebook of the time had a political leaning, they could, based on knowledge of information about people, of their interests, of their leanings, could choose to specifically target and remind their political leaning individuals to go out and vote and choose to not remind everyone else in a different political party. That was the hypothetical. If you have the power to do this, it means you could do this. And that was scary because they had access to so much information. And so people in that entire space within digital marketing started to get a little bit nervous and they started to talk to each other. What are we going to do about this? How do we know we can trust the people in these positions? And not just with Facebook, we have Google, you have all these other large companies that have a potentially political leaning that's not openly available. But how do we make sure that the people within those organizations do not try to influence our political system for their profitability gain? So then what started happening is people actually started to speak out about this a little bit. And people started changing jobs because some people were like, I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be in a place where I could potentially be a part of a company where my social responsibility and my ethics are being violated by people above me that I have no control over their decisions, but I'm contributing to them becoming something that I don't want to be. And that's where you started to see this influence of documentaries coming out about the fact that people were trying to speak out and say, there is something happening. Now, what else started happening is we started to see how the self-esteem of teenage girls with the introduction of Instagram and their actual mental health deterioration research was coming out. And people started to realize, oh my goodness, people are being emotionally affected by the internet. And so there was a lot of thought around what should happen next. And that's when you started seeing that Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma. If you haven't seen it, you definitely should, because it describes a little bit about how algorithms work and the polarization of our political system and people and relationships, and how we're starting to be relationally divided because of technology, because of what we're doing on our phone, and because of what's happening in the data of providing information to you. And actually, the social dilemma talks about many people that walked away from these organizations were saying, yeah, there was a time where all of these companies started recruiting all of these developers that specifically were working in the gambling industry to try to make the technology more and more addictive. And they started doing that even within your Gmail account, tinging things on your phone, trying to get you to look at your messages, making you feel like you had this fear of missing out. You had to go back to the platforms again and again. The infinite scroll is completely out of the gambling handbook. And so all of this stuff started to sway what people were seeing, along with the algorithm changes. And actually, in 2018, MIT Media Lab did a research study about how falsehoods are 70% more likely to be retweeted on Twitter than the truth. And they saw that false news reached 1,500 people about 6 times faster than the truth. Why? Why was this happening? Well, they said this suggests that false news spreads faster, deeper, and more broadly than the truth because humans, not robots, are more likely to spread it. Why? Because there's a novelty hypothesis. Fake news was more novel than the truth, and people were more likely to share novel information. They're also more likely to corroborate things, make comments, express sadness, joy, trust, anticipation. They emotionally engage with it to the point that they decide to share it as well because they're shocked by it. Now, this was just a simple study that MIT did with actually funding through Twitter to do that so they could take out, is it the bots doing this? They actually did a study where they took out the bots. They saw, do the people do this? And they found that it was the human beings. We are emotion factories. We are constantly creating emotions. And they, a lot of the time, I would say 95% of the population are controlled by their emotions, even though they don't realize it. So this brings us back to the next, ready for it, political scandal. Okay, so what ended up happening is you have this company called Cambridge Analytica, and they were a consulting company, political consulting company from the EU that knew a lot about Facebook. And so this is the big to do. What happened with this and why was it a big deal? Well, I think that during this time period, Facebook had pulled back a little bit and they realized, yeah, we really should not be helping politicians because we do have a lot of influence. And what if we get accused of rigging the elections, right? So they started to pull back and they're not pulling out the stops to help people win political campaigns because they're getting paid copious amounts of money. You got to figure it out on your own. So what happened is actually the Trump campaign as well as Ted Cruz in the 2010 and then the 2016 presidential elections, they started to ask this company, Cambridge Analytica, to help them use data to target consumers on Facebook and Google, all these different things. And so what ended up happening is, and this is where people started to freak out, is that remember when I was talking about those APIs and the token connections, and you have these third-party apps that you can integrate with Facebook? Well, what was happening is Facebook didn't even realize they were doing this, but they were allowing app developers to provide their little game, like if you've ever played Farmville or whatever else as a third-party integration into Facebook, that was accessible to Facebook users. And when they agreed to the terms and conditions, the users were also allowing not only access to their profile information, but access to friends of friends. And they didn't know that they were doing that when they were agreeing to the terms and conditions, which meant that this app developer that created, I think it was called My Digital Life or something like that. I have to look back. But basically, this app company was able to get all of the data on anybody who played that game, plus their friends of friends. And Cambridge Analytica was able to get this data information. Now, around this time period, Google was also rolling out the ability to upload email addresses into Google to do targeted campaigns to specific contact lists of people that you had to do that remarketing that we had talked about. And so what ended up happening is it broke loose that this is exactly how the Trump campaign was getting their ads sent to specific people. They were using this data that they had acquired from Facebook users without their permission, essentially, because the friends of friends never gave permission. And they were targeting people based on their profiles. So you could take that information and then also upload all this stuff into Google and essentially be able to send specific campaign information that you wanted them to see in advertising. Now, most of us are like, okay, well, what's the big deal? Because like I see political ads all the time. I can decide, I can use my critical thinking skills. But the nature of it was that they actually took this information that Facebook had left a back door to and had no idea they did it and did not have people's permission to use that data. Now, I remember during this time period thinking to myself, this seems a little bit hypocritical because Facebook literally was helping before this and they chose not to help now. But anyways, so Facebook came out with all these statements saying, oh, we didn't know this was a thing. It's not our fault. We've shut this down and we're not going to allow people to do this anymore. And then we're going to be reviewing everything with our app developers, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Cambridge Analytica, I think they eventually filed for bankruptcy or something. They're no longer a company. But with that being said, it started to add to people being concerned about political advertising. And with that, you add in this layer of fake news that's going around and spreading. And remember, this MIT study came out in 2018, which means they had a while of studying the data to show this is a problem. And what we've seen psychologically happen within this, because algorithms are trying to grab the thing that you are emotionally shocked by, right? And this is the psychology piece that I was talking about. You need to understand if you're going to market your business or whatever. People talk about all the time in trainings creating clickbait. Now, I love creating clickbait. But it's a super dangerous thing because it's kind of like having a weapon that if you choose to use it in the wrong way, you could seriously hurt people. And what I mean by that is you could affect their belief system and their knowledge about the world. And if you are purposefully creating falsehoods and spreading them, you are affecting our society and making people feel angry or upset. And we've seen this start happening, especially honestly within the boomer generation is one that I see the most online anger because they're trying to make sense of all this news they're getting, and some of it's not true and some of it is. And when they subscribe or adhere to specific news sources that feed them what they want, they will tend to believe everything that's in alignment with their belief system. Now, I pick on the boomer generation, but they are not the only ones. Let's back up a little bit to look at what's happening right now with ChatGPT, for example. And this is going to be the gawk portion for this episode because we are so over time and ChatGPT is a little bit out of order when it comes to the history of marketing. But here we go. So ChatGPT, for a little bit, they actually had this feature where you could share the link to your conversation with ChatGPT with somebody else. And it was I don't know if it was by default or something on for everybody where you could read all of the conversations. And the Washington Post actually took the time to look at and analyze 47,000 conversations on ChatGPT because, ChatGPT, they turned off the feature so you couldn't share those, but they used something like the Wayback Machine or something to see anything that was on the internet in the past you can go and find somewhere. Even if the website's been taken down, there's resources you can still find, the skeletal footprint of what it was and all of that. If you didn't know that, by the way, I use Wayback Machine to find things when somebody's website goes down and they don't know how to like recreate all the content. But anyways, there's tools like that available. Some of them are free, some of them are not. But what they found in the data that they analyzed is some pretty interesting things. First of all, 10% of the chats appear to show people talking to the chatbot about their emotions. Now, just by the way, this is 2024 data because they turned that feature off and they didn't have that many to analyze. So, super interesting, kind of creepy stuff, like about what people are talking to ChatGPT about. But this phenomenon is now called AI psychosis. It's not like a medical diagnosis or anything, but it's like this issue that people can develop beliefs and have intense conversations that are potentially harmful to them and their mental health with ChatGPT. And actually, in this article that the Washington Post put together, OpenAI, which is the owner of ChatGPT, estimated last month that 0.15% of its users each week, more than 1 million people, show signs of being emotionally reliant on ChatGPT. Now, what's interesting about this, like, just so you know, there's been multiple cases of people trying to sue OpenAI because their family members have been encouraged by ChatGPT to commit suicide. Like, that's scary. And actually, what they additionally found in this study is that ChatGPT was 10 times more likely to begin responses with variations of yes. What that means is that it is creating an echo chamber of validation geared towards the person who is having these beliefs. If you lean a certain way politically, if you believe something about what the truth is about a religious organization or whatever, ChatGPT is going to give you what you want based on your previous chat history. Now, in the more recent future, Google and Facebook, and we haven't even gotten to the affiliate marketing, have admitted that they have changed to influencer companies. Now, they've been doing this for a while, gearing up information, admitting that they influence people. But ChatGPT is doing the same thing, except now it's getting even more scary with the whole falsehood endorsement. Because, and I'm just going to read this from the Washington Post article. ChatGPT showed the same cheerleading tone in conversations with some users who shared far-fetched conspiracy theories or beliefs that appeared detached from reality. In one conversation, a user asked broad questions about data collection practices of tech companies. The chatbot responded with factual information about Meta and Google's policy. ChatGPT changed course after the user typed a query connecting Google's parent company with the plot of a 2001 Pixar movie, Alphabet Inc., in regards to Monsters Inc. and the global domination plan. I'm going to skip forward a little bit and just say ChatGPT went on to say that Alphabet was guilty of aiding and abetting crimes against humanity and suggests that the user call for Nuremberg-style tribunals to bring the company to justice. Did you just hear that? What? So that's, I think, where we're at in society. But I mean, really, the thought behind who has the access to that data and the user profiles that are being created and what is that company doing with it is something that definitely needs to be a thought that people are asking themselves, because this stuff is not going away. And I'm just going to leave it at that for right now, but I hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you do, give it a review on wherever you're listening, and I will see you next time.